Hey, again, I'll give a few minutes for everybody to uh, kind of scroll in. I'm sure we'll have some latecomers. Oh, good news, Freedom Fighter. Thank you. I do appreciate it. All right. Hey again. Hey again. Good afternoon, Misty. Oh, I need to throw this up. And I will throw this up. As per usual, trigger warning, this subject is very sensitive. We prioritize mental health over views any day. If you need to take a break, we understand. And we'll see you on the next live. You all know that I get a bit verklempt when it comes to this book. Hey, Justin, how are you? Let me send a quick message. We are live, we are live, we are really fucking live. Praise the Lord and Jesus Christ. Hey, Chris. Sorry for the clickies. What's up, Groovy? Hang on, I gotta go full screen for Groovy for a second. Look behind my left shoulder there, Groovy. Found the rock, so made sure you were able to see it. Hey, Lucy. Hope you're well. How's the new boot? The bit. Let's. Just wanted to let Groovy see my rock lobster. Lupe. I don't know. They need to jump up in their bed so y'all can see them. Yeah, those boots are no fun. All right. We got thank you, Groovy. Thank you. We're on chapter 12. Atheists in foxholes. Praise be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. Psalms 144. On his first combat deployment, Army Major Doug Eder had been in Iraq all of 2 hours when a tall soldier in dusty, frayed fatigues slouched into the chapel and asked for the chaplain. Eder is a Presbyterian minister and, as an army chaplain, wore a gold cross on the collar of his tan desert uniform. At that time, freshly laundered. He gestured to a white plastic chair. The soldier lowered himself and cleared his throat. Eder waited. I want to talk about the second guy I killed today, the soldier began. Eder was not exactly unprepared for such an opening conversational gambit. He is a man of deep faith, trained in both military and religious practice. He is one of a cadre of thousands of ministers, imams, rabbis, and priests, the military commissions to minister to its men and women, to guide their spiritual and ethical lives, and, as the Army puts it, to strengthen strong personal character and moral well-being of troops. The military offers any aid to those with moral injury. These men and women are among the first responders. But Eder, also a soldier through and through, from a proud line of warriors dating back to the Revolutionary War. Now it was his turn. 2005 in Western Iraq, one of the most perilous times and places of the Iraq War, and Eder had just arrived at Cap Habaniya on his first deployment with Task Force Panther, composed mostly of soldiers from the Pennsylvania National Guard. After a year, when they would complete their 12-month deployment, they would stand with heads bowed as their scrawled regrets rose in smoke from a stone baptismal font. In the interim, Task Force Panther would be mauled. 15 of its soldiers would go home in flag-draped coffins. 61 would be wounded, and they would see many atrocities and kill many insurgents in some of the most brutal fighting of the war. Eder's boyish face, benign gaze, and mellifluous voice belied a still interior. He was an activist chaplain. Wearing his body armor and helmet, he often rode into battle with the soldiers of Task Force Panther. As they fortified themselves with the black humor of Molly Hatchet's song blasting over the intercoms, flirting with disaster, occasionally Eder would carry a military shotgun, a visible emblem of his belief that war was a sin, but sometimes a necessary one, and a demonstration of his solidarity with the troops. That's funny. Sweet Melissa, coming in late. Chaplains are non-combatants under international law, prohibited from engaging in combat. Under U.S. policy, chaplains may not carry weapons, but Eder, a former high-altitude mountaineer and paramedic, a man with a strong sense of history, is certain of his place on the battlefield as a representative of God. Free time. I am not taking any unnecessary risk, he wrote home, but I am also not sitting back waiting for soldiers to come to me. I am going to them. That mirrors. There can be few more disorienting places for religious clergy than the midst of war. Profound cases of moral injury come to them literally through the open door of the chapel. The raw ugliness of violence, the relentless maiming and death of human beings, and the scale of destruction seem to deny the existence of the benevolent God of our childhoods. Existential issues flood the war zone. Is there an almighty God? Why would he allow this to happen? Then there is the tricky issue of killing. The military is organized, equipped, trained, and deployed to kill, a purpose that transgresses the direct command of God. It's crazy, Melissa. Down here, we didn't get anything. My parents, brother, and sister all just got power back. Uh, 2 hours ago. But stay safe. Um, I wanted to mention this, talking about the chaplains and everything. My chaplain uh was a, I don't know how many tabs the dude had. He was special forces, a ranger, uh president's 100, and then obviously airborne because of the unit we were in. So he was well equipped. He came from a combat background. Uh, Super good guy. Yay, power. All right. Even for the most devout, belief can be severely tested in war. In some cases, war has shattered the faith of military chaplains themselves. There's a saying that there are no atheists in foxholes, Eder once told me. Untrue. There are lots of atheists in foxholes. There are stories, of course, of miraculous battlefield epiphanies, of soldiers finding God in the midst of mayhem. But for the most part, it may be the best that can happen is that warriors grit through it as best they can, that the military chaplains hang tight to their own faith, and that they listen and comfort as they are able, and leave the deeper healing of moral injury until after the war. But being heard, being heard in a deep, non judgmental way can be the beginning of healing. The soldier who walked through the chapel door was just finishing a 12-month deployment in Western Iraq, and Eder assumed he had killed many times. How was the second guy I killed today any different? The story came out in a torrent. The soldier was in a unit assigned to assault a house where insurgents were holed up. He was in the second stick or group as the first stick of soldiers warily stepped into the ground floor rooms. He crept up the stairs toward the second floor, and near the top, a long hallway stretched into the shadows where an insurgent was raising his weapon. It misfired, and as the soldiers brought up his own weapon, it too misfired. Desperately, he pulled the charging handle back to clear it, and it misfired again. And at the end of the hallway, the insurgent was bent over, beating his rifle on his leg to clear it. The soldier dropped his weapon and charged, pulling his bayonet from the sheath as he sprinted. In seconds, he reached the man and slammed into him. Driving the bayonet deep into his heart, the man slumped to the ground and died. Standard military procedure is to search out the body for any usable intelligence. And the soldier found the man's wallet and opened it. Inside, a weathered snapshot of a man posing with several women and children. The man in the picture now lay dead at his feet, and the soldier made the presumption that the photo showed the man's wives and children. What the? y'all can call me crazy, but put this story in the middle of a field, and this is the story of the first guy I ever killed. I could bring up my medical records to show where I talked to the doctors about it. Emory has the records of them making that one of the scenarios um of my immersion therapy. Um I am absolutely floored at the similarities of so many stories that I hear. Um, I'm at a loss. Insane. Okay. So he felt very guilty about that, Eder told me later. Someone who had tried to kill him, someone who had been his target, suddenly became human. Intellectually, he knew he had done the right thing, but emotionally, he felt that this taking of a life was in some way morally wrong, and he was unable to synthesize the two in any peaceful way. And he was unable, sorry, he came looking for a word of grace, a word of hope, looking for a word of forgiveness. Looking for, I want to say, some way out of the remorse and guilt he was feeling. In the months ahead, Eder would sit with many soldiers he described as seeking a release from the pressure that was on their soul, their heart, their mind. We were talking late one night in the kitchen of his house in rural hills of eastern Pennsylvania, while a late spring snowfall frosted the fields outside. How I kept asking, are you able to give them that release, that grace, representing God, who unmistakably forbids killing, and the prophet Jesus, who taught love? How can you comfort someone with deep remorse over a killing? There was a long pause while Eder reflected. When he began speaking, it was in his slow, soothing voice, the words coming in complete sentences and paragraphs uninterrupted by the and like of our modern speech. For that soldier who killed with his bayonet, and for the many others who came seeking comfort, he said, he would remind them that talking to a chaplain is in a confessional manner is confidential and protected speech, and they could talk freely. He would listen without judgment and ask if they wanted to pray, and maybe half of them would say no, and the others usually wanted Eder to pray for them. I would remind them that we have all fallen short of our own hopes, aspirations, and dreams for ourselves. I think he's going with the for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, right? That we have all sinned, and that in spite of that, God loves us. And in that incredible love God has for us, there is freedom. Freedom to live boldly, freedom to live happily, freedom to live without guilt and remorse. Toward the end of their sorry, y'all. Toward the end of their 12-month combat tour, the soldiers of Task Force Panther were coming to see Eder more often. There's something I'd like to get off my chest, they'd say. I'd like to confess. I just want to talk this out. It was an incredible honor to be trusted with such intimate details. Eder felt. To see them bare their souls after living together for months. I'd seen them naked in the showers, so to see them bare their souls is a whole different level of intimacy. That deserves our respect, our dignity, our highest and best. I think one thing chaplains would agree on, regardless of our religious affiliations, is that you are in a very holy place at that time. It's a place of great vulnerability and must be approached with love and compassion. But listening can't be all there is to it, I argued. How do you comfort a soldier who just realized he's killed a real human being and that his country will call him a hero for it? If that soldier feels he has violated some deeply held moral belief, how does he reconcile that with the person he thought he was before he killed? How can you help him work toward forgiving himself for what he feels is a sin? How does he earn God's forgiveness? I recently read a paper by Shira Magwin of the San Francisco VA Medical Center. We've seen her name throughout this book. Following traumatic events that involve acting in ways that transgress deeply held moral beliefs, she wrote, veterans may develop views about self, others, and the world that make engaging in self-forgiveness particularly difficult. In our experience, she wrote of herself and her clinical research colleagues, some of the reasons that veterans struggle with self-forgiveness is because they believe A, self-forgiveness would mean they are condoning their actions. B, self-forgiveness would lead to forgetting what happened. C, they're unworthy or undeserving of forgiveness. And or D, they need to be punished to atone for what they did. But there's hope, she continued. In these situations, helping veterans recognize that although their actions have violated their values, they may regret their actions. They can work to accept that those actions need not define who they are. I am an American, a good soldier, a good husband, and dad. And also, I have killed to protect my buddies, whom I love and honor. Moving forward with a focus on values, Magwin wrote, can be healing for veterans who have killed in combat. It's not easy, Eder agreed, for anyone to think through the issues relating to killing. Our society repeatedly tells everyone killing is wrong. Killing is wrong. We say it's okay in self-defense, but it should be avoided at all costs. And then we take weapons designed to kill, put them into the hands of our young men and women and say, go forth with the blessing of our nation and defend it. And as you know, I think war is sinful, but sometimes morally justifiable. And the same is true for killing. I don't think if it is ever not a sin, but there are times when I do believe it is the morally right thing to do. He paused. And holding those two truths, which are almost diametrically opposed and antithetical to one another, is the paradox and complexity of combat that we as warriors experience. That seemed like a considerable burden to put on people, just trying to stay alive in combat, especially when they are 7 or 8 months into a life constant danger and stress and filth and heat that roll on without let up, without ever a day off. But that's what we ask. Be safe, Squid. It seemed to me to virtually guarantee a moral injury, no matter which way an individual soldier or Marine chose. I thought of Nick Rudolph and Darren Doss, Joey Shianu and Jake Sexton. Sinners? What exactly is a sin? I asked Eder. And if you sin, don't you require absolution, a formal release from guilt? A sin is a violation of God's will as we understand it, he said. And you can be forgiven for a sin? Yes, absolutely. You must confess. Your remorse must be genuine. But forgiveness, absolution, Eder said, likely comes over time, not necessarily in one ritual or one long late night talk in the chapel at Habanilla. Chris, I believe that in the literal Hebrew, killing is murder, and killing in war is not the same as murder. No, I don't think it is the same. Um, do I feel like a murderer for all the killing I've done? I do not. Do I feel bad for the collateral damage? And I'm not just talking about collateral damage from bombs. I'm talking about, as this kid saw and I saw when gathering intelligence, you find pictures of a man with his family and it hits you and you go, well, why not me? So many variables, and and what the writer says about killing for one's family, even if you are one's fellow soldiers and in their unit, is something different if you've never experienced it. Um, even if you're sitting, if you're on a patrol in a place where you feel like the war was unjustified, you're doing your job, You're protecting your subordinates, uh, the man and woman to either side. Um, there's honor in that. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. It was very verbose for probably what you were seeking a simple uh, answer to, but it was something that caught my eye, and kind of hit me. Um, saying that killing for your the men and women by your side. Shalom, Dale. You're good, buddy. Anyway, it was kind of a good cathartic moment for me, actually. It was the that understanding, that forgiveness are more a process than in a single act prompted him at the end of Task Force Panther's 12-month combat tour to summon soldiers to commit their regrets to index cards to be consumed in flames in that baptismal font. I wanted to express as a person of faith, a person of hope, that their sins could be forgiven, that their guilt could be expunged, he said. My goal was that by the very physical witnessing, the banishing of those cards in fire, they would begin the process of healing. I did not think, he said, standing and stretching, that they would leave there immediately thinking that everything was great, or that all of their sins and troubles had been removed. But I wanted it to be the start of the process where they could find healing and wholeness again. Finding healing and wholeness back in the civilian world would be a difficult process for Eder himself. In Iraq, he felt strengthened in the presence of other soldiers, comforted in the intimacies shared with those who struggled with the same perils and demons. After several months in Iraq, he felt estranged from the civilian world, outside that alternate moral universe of war. Midway through his combat tour, his best friend, Lieutenant Colonel Michael E. McLaughlin, was killed in a nearby IED blast. Wyatt Eder flew home to Pennsylvania to officiate at the memorial service. When it was over, he turned to his wife and said, "I want to go home." She responded, "I'll go get the car." "No," Eder said, "back to Iraq, back to the battalion, back to war." When Eder finally returned to Pennsylvania for good, he found he absorbed too much of his soldiers' stress and trauma, in addition to his own. He was burned out, compassion fatigue. "I had nothing left," he explained. "I was spent emotionally, physically, mentally. The sudden disappearance of danger and stress and camaraderie from his life was disorienting, and he had no one to talk to." The chaplain had no chaplain. His emotions swung violently. He started driving recklessly, drinking heavily. One day, he found himself standing in his driveway, a cigar and a glass of scotch in hand. It was 9 a.m. To explain himself, he once told me of his warrior ancestors who fought in the Civil War. Wounded and captured, he was sent to the notorious Confederate prison at Andersonville, just down the road, where some 13,000 Union prisoners died of starvation, disease, and exposure. Great grandfather survived. When he came home in 1865, he parked himself in the kitchen and never left. He was 20 years old. I don't know what he did to stay alive at Andersonville, Eder said one evening. I'm certain he stole food from other prisoners. Was what that wrong? Never leaving the kitchen. Now I understand. When the fighting is done, when soldiers come home, some of those spiritual, moral wounds are like an abscess just beneath the surface. Enormous pain, and if left untreated, they can poison the heart and soul. Eder eventually sought help and found a caring therapist. But what sustained his moral and spiritual strength during the war, what prevented deeper moral wounds, was not only his religious faith, but his unshakable belief in the mission. When soldiers would come to him for comfort, he said, I always tried to give them the very best, my full attention, all the love and compassion that I had, while still maintaining Army standards, reminding them of the things we still had to do. For example, he continued, whenever I did a funeral, I always had 3 goals: to honor the fallen, to comfort their buddies as best I could, and to push them back out the door. Because, as we say in the Warrior's Creed, the mission comes first. I will always place the mission first. That is why we're here. That's my job, and I totally support that. Unless they change the Warrior's Creed, that sounds way different than what I remember. Like many Americans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, Eder had gone to Warfield to war filled with moral outrage and an Old Testament desire to strike back at the insurgents who were attacking Americans. Our enemy has chosen war as his course, and we shall fill his plate to overflowing. I cannot agree with that, in Iraq especially. Eder wrote home one night, shortly after he led memorial service for one of his soldiers killed in action. He was there in 05, I guess. It was different than when we invaded. But the Iraq got flooded with insurgents after we invaded. I know some Iraqis appreciated us liberating, but when you go places for the wrong reasons, it turns into a mess. Eder wrote home one night, shortly after he led a memorial service for one of his soldiers killed in action. We will dish it out to him in such a way that the very thought of it will nauseate, sicken, and repel him. We'll give it to him in such a way that he will never have the stomach to it again. Some chaplains, though, found it was more of a struggle to absorb the moral realities of war. Steve Dundas, a Navy commander and Catholic chaplain, grew up in a military family, passionate about the ideals of patriotism, duty, and service. Conservative Republican to the core, a devotee of Rush Limbaugh. Bleh. After 9/11, Dundas was one of the many people who wanted revenge. Let's go get those bad guys and Saddam too, he told his military colleagues. But it wasn't until 2007 that he was reassigned from his post at the Naval Hospital at Camp Lejeune to a mobile training team in Iraq. A year after Doug Etter's soldiers burned their regrets and left Iraq, Dundas and his team began working out of Al-Taqaddam Air Base, where Marine Lieutenant Sarah Plummer was on duty monitoring drones. Dundas and the team traveled constantly through the hostile territory in western Iraq, visiting remote U.S. outposts where Dundas would hold worship services and counsel troubled young soldiers and Marines. Steve Dundas is a small man with a polished bald head and an engaging smile. He peers out through the world through wire rimmed glasses with a benevolent gaze. A baseball fanatic, he feels most comfortable at a ballpark. I know as a Christian that the Bible says, cast all of your cares on him, Jesus, and I do try to do that. But sometimes the ballpark brings me closer to him than the church. Dundas wrote on his blog, Padre Steve. But far out in desolate western Iraq, he was uncomfortably aware that Al Qaeda considered chaplains as high value targets. As the team traveled, he began to realize the immense scale of destruction and misery beyond what he'd experienced as a trauma chaplain. Back home, he'd ministered to the severely injured. He had seen suffering. He thought of himself as hardened to human pain, untouchable by trauma. But this was devastating. Young Americans gruesomely injured or dying. Villages and towns turned to rubble. Streams of refugees, the few who ventured out to the market or mosque, risking being maimed by suicide bombs. And by the time the rationale for the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq had been exposed, Dundas realized as a fabrication, it all struck him like a physical blow. I felt lied to, and I felt that those lies cost too many thousands of American lives and far too much destruction. Dundas told me over a couple of beers one Sunday afternoon in Virginia Beach. What he had seen from afar as a righteous intervention to unseat a barbaric dictator and bring democracy to Iraq's people now appeared as one of the most incredibly disastrous foreign policy things we ever got involved in. That aside, Dundas said, seeing the devastation of those Iraqi cities and towns, some of it caused by us, and some of it caused by insurgents, and by the civil war that we brought about, that really hit me to the core. Wyatt, just block it, bro. Up until that point, he said he had always believed that the government would do the right thing, that the country's leaders would tell the truth, that the nation would ask military volunteers to do only what was right. Now he was left with the awful knowledge that he just trusted all of them. Excuse me, y'all. What's worse, he felt, was that the war had been a calculated choice by my leaders, all claimed to be Christian. And I didn't see anyone in the churches, at least the type of church I was in at the time, questioning anything. And I wondered where God was. And I begun to wonder where God was in my life. And for almost 2 years, I was an agnostic, just hoping that maybe God would show up again. Fellow naval officer once asked him, "So where do chaplains go for help?" I said, "Right now, I don't know." But he went to see a therapist who was the first one to ask, "So how are you with the big guy?" At this point, Dundas replied, "I don't even know if there is a big guy." I mean, I've been there. It took me a long time to get back to my faith, and it took me even longer to start being observant again. It took a catalyst of a short little fat man sitting in his basement 16 hours a day to push me over that edge. But anyway, it is what it is. Oh, damn. Well, I mean, that makes sense given Luther's descendancy. I, it took what Dundas calls a Christmas miracle to bring him back into his faith. He had terrible insomnia when he returned from Iraq, and he flung himself into his work at the Naval Medical Center in Portsmouth, Virginia, as a way to reorient himself. He was on duty one night during Advent, the Christian season of preparation for Christmas. When his emergency pager went off, he grabbed his hospital stole oil and book of common prayer and rushed downstairs, where he found an elderly patient in his 90s in his last moments. Dundas gave him the sacrament of last rites and the final prayer of commendation. Over the man's face passed a sense of tremendous peace. Dundas felt, and the patient took one final breath before he died. I found out later the guy was a saint, a naval officer, a doctor who would donate his time to take care of prisoners in jail, did pro bono care for pregnant women, deeply active in the Episcopal Church. Dundas said, "I was really in the presence of a saint. I felt God is still around." It became a reawakening of his faith. With his renewed faith, in which he focused less on the details of liturgical ritual and more on living in grace, Dundas began to work closely with Marines coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. There were a lot of Marines who'd come to the hospital because they knew there'd be a chaplain who'd respond any time of the day or night, simply because we had a light on. And if you go to the hospital chaplain, the guys in your unit don't really know about it. He would see all kinds of believers, agnostics, Wiccans, and questioning Christians. Oh, Hefe, always ready with the ready joke to make me laugh. Thank you, sir. They came to see me because they knew I wasn't going to run them off, like some chaplains from very conservative congregations. Dundas said, after Iraq, he said, I became a lot more open to people with questions and had more respect for those who reject faith because I understand their arguments. I still believe, but I get where they're coming from. The Marines who were most troubled were guys like Nick Rudolph, who was forced from the Corps for acting up after his 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan. Many others were being med boarded out, declared by medical review board to be unfit to serve for physical or behavioral health reasons, and dismissed against their will. These guys, with their short careers, have been through so much, emotionally and physically, Dundas said. They would just rend my heart because, they're struggling. And most of them knew that what they really wanted to do in life was continue serving as a Marine. And they knew that was not going to happen and that they were being processed out. That was their biggest moral injury, realizing that they could no longer serve. A waitress brought 2 more steins of beer. Dundas took an appreciative sip and sneaked a glance at the Orioles game on the widescreen TV bolted to the wall. I was curious. Why was being dismissed from the Corps a moral injury? Dundas turned back on his stool. Because their fundamental belief, he said, was that their service in the Marine Corps or Navy or the Army was paramount in their lives. That being there for their fellow Marines or sailors was an overriding value. Even more than I can't serve my country anymore, or I can't trust the government, or even I lost my faith, is I can't be there for my buddies. Facts. And they feel they've let their buddies down, and they feel abandoned by the system. They can no longer do the things that they believe define them as a person. Eventually, that afternoon, I asked Dundas what the future held for him, whether he'd retire and go do something else. His long answer was no. He found a new purpose in ministering to those young Marines and sailors who find themselves suddenly out of the service and feeling lost. What's up, Tav? And abandoned with the depression, anxiety, sleeplessness, distrust of authority, and suspicious of social relationships that often accompany moral injury. That's why this suspicion of social relationship that often accompany moral injury, you go back to my complex PTSD studies, that's why it is so emblematic of complex PTSD as opposed to regular PTSD in my research anyway. I know APA and all would disagree, but that's just the way I feel about it. One of the hardest things to say to them is that even though you can no longer do the things you most value, you can go on. That you can find value in new things. It takes a while for them to process, Dundas said, and you hope they do eventually, because so many of them are such good people. How do we get them to the next part of their lives? That's one of the things we will struggle with in the next 10 to 15 years. How will we take all these guys who have been injured physically and emotionally, who are going to get put out of the military? How do we help them redeem their loss and turn that into something that helps others. Amen to that. Amen to that. He drained his beer just as I was wondering aloud whether the act of forgiving is essential if veterans are to find new life. Dundas waved his hand dismissively. Forgiveness? I don't know how that works, he said. I'm still working through a lot of this. It's not like you can say the magic word and forgive. After a pause, he added, I guess forgiveness, whether it's to the people who blew you up, or the people who sent you there, or the people who treated you like dirt when you came back, forgiveness has to be a part of it. But you can't just spring forgiveness on people. It's not a cheap thing. A lot of people, sometimes, even in church, are saying, oh, just forgive them. Okay, yeah, got that. But what if after you forgive them, something happens and you're still pissed off? Forgiveness is a process. It's not a one time thing, but I think it is essential to the healing of moral injuries. And I have to confess, he said, as he slid off his stool to head home, sometimes I know I'm not there. Whether forgiveness is a part of it or not, whether it comes slowly or not at all, there are ways to help with moral injuries, and the military's multi faith chaplain corps should lead the way. That's the conviction of many chaplains with whom I've spoken. Army Colonel Thomas C. Waynick, the senior chaplain at Fort Benning, has helped spur the Defense Department's chaplain corps to adopt a new training program on moral injury. Combat comes at a cost, said Waynick, who rode with the 3rd Infantry Division in the assault and capture of Baghdad back in early April 2003. Oh, can we talk about somebody who I had great respect for um, back in those days? As I briefed him and we planned the war, uh, General Lloyd Austin, former Secretary of Defense, current probably CEO of something, um, putting himself in for a Silver Star while he sat in the talk, putting it out there. Disgusting, disgusting, disgusting. Thank you. Jeff knows what I'm talking about. If somebody can, Jeff, can you put up the anti-hero podcast link since I said that? Oh, no, you're on your phone. I'm sorry. I'll do it. Yeah, when it talked about 3rd Infantry Division and the invasion, I it hit me again. Oh, thanks, Jeff. I was going to do it because you're just on your phone. That made me ill again. Oh, all right. Everybody's got it. Appreciate it. There y'all go. Thanks to all the blue in my chat. Hey, Mr. Carey. The good news is that in the safety of caring relationships, people can find forgiveness and healing for moral wounds. They don't have to be mortal wounds. It is religious communities, he believes, that can best provide that safe, caring environment. They could, but religious traditions provide a framework to process moral injury and moral dilemmas, he said. There are also non religious ways to approach the issue, but it is predominantly a spiritual, existential issue. Yeah, I mean, we can call it an existential crisis without calling it a spiritual one, right? Veterans of any religious belief can speak with their God as a source of unconditional love without judgment. Chaplains and clergy can support service members by facilitating conversations with God to work through guilt and find forgiveness. I put that idea to Eder, who virtually burst with enthusiasm. Yes, he said, healing moral injury is in our primary lane. It is our work, the work of the church, the synagogue, the mosque. We've been in the business of guilt and confession and pain and suffering for a long time. Nobody should know more about it. Nobody should be better prepared to help others through it than us. What chaplains, civilian clergy, and veterans should understand, Eder said, is that there is hope, ways of finding peace and wholeness and forgiveness. In fact, clergy and religious groups already are beginning to grapple with veterans and moral injury, looking for ways they can help. In Illinois, Wheat Ridge Ministries has funded outreach to congregations across the country, coaching clergy and parishioners on how to listen to veterans and provide support for healing physical, psychological, and moral wounds. Networks of veterans, therapists, and religious leaders are active in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. Point Man Ministries in New York links Christian congregations with veterans. The Atlanta based nonprofit Care for the Troops trains religious congregations to reach out to veterans, involve them in joint service projects, and begin to talk about moral injuries. In Fayetteville, North Carolina, Quakers are working with chaplains at Fort Bragg, home of the Army Special Forces and the 82nd Airborne Division, and the psychological operations, to brief commanders and troops about moral injury. Bright Divinity School's Soul Repair Center in Fort Worth provides education and resources to support faith communities working with veterans. We're not trying to tell anyone to ignore their pain or to justify their pain. We're not trying to tell anybody to ignore it. We're looking it in the eye squarely, facing it, and then we're going to move through it like someone moves through the valley of shadows to a new place of light and wholeness. This falls right in the chaplain's lane. No one should be more qualified to speak of this than chaplains. It is a matter of the soul and heart. And it's only when the soul and heart are addressed that people can find true healing. I don't think that the soul and heart have to be a religious thing, by the way. Um, your soul and heart can be healed by having a relationship with your soulmate and they understand you completely and support you through your healing journey, right? Um, there are many other ways to find it than church. You don't have to believe in a God or a particular belief structure to find healing for your heart and soul. Um, so let's see. That should be it. Yep. We'll finish this next week probably. If other things aren't going on. Um, we'll have to see how the drop shoulders things go. Um, but everything will keep everybody informed. Uh, since Jeff's had power issues, I don't know. I doubt we'll do anything tonight. Um, plus, puppies and fun stuff around the house. But we'll keep y'all updated. Um, if we're not going to do anything, I might do something later. I have some things I want to do before work week, and I have to get extra work done if I'm going to be taking a trip. So shout out to everybody. Um, Mrs. Metcalf, I saw the ugly crying comment. Um, I hope you'll be all right, and I hope that the squid travels safe. All right, y'all. Um, I will talk to y'all in a bit. See ya.